over to something completely different from what we have heard so far during this conference. I'm Thomas Kronholm, a researcher at the Department of Forest Biomaterials and Technology here at SLU. And I will present one of my latest surveys. This one is about family forest owners, also known as non-industrial private forest owners, and their awareness, knowledge, and the forest management preferences regarding forest damage. So a short background to this study. So forest damage is a global problem, and the risk of suffering damage is expected to increase as a result of the ongoing climate change. We get a warmer climate, more species will have a good environment to live in, and also a more global economy where we travel and bring stuff in that may damage the forest. So in northern Sweden, we are especially hard hit by damage caused by moose and attacks by pine stem rust fungi. And this leads, of course, to great loss, not only in money, but also biodiversity and aesthetic values and so on. And then these family forest owners or non-industrial private forest owners, then they have a very important role in preventing and taking care of this forest damage. Because in Sweden, we have about 300,000 private forest owners owning about half of the forest land. And since we have problems with damage, there are ongoing research projects about how you can prevent and take care of these damages. And a lot of these measures will then depend on the acceptance and willingness of private forest owners to either execute the measures themselves or by hiring contractors to take care of this. So my interest was then to study to what extent are these forest owners aware of forest damage on their forest properties. Second, to what extent are they able to identify forest damage by themselves with their current knowledge? And finally, what kind of perceptions of different management alternatives that potentially could be used to prevent and remedy forest damage do they have? So the study area was northern Sweden, in this case Norrbotten and Västerbotten counties. This corresponds to about 37% of Sweden's land area, very sparsely populated area. It's about 5% of Sweden's population living here. But 9.6 million hectares of forest land and about 41,000 NIF owners then. So the survey was distributed to a random sample of about 1,200 NIF owners above 18 years and with at least 6 hectares of forest. And the survey period was in the end of last year. So the results are not yet published, but the manuscript is in the final stages of the review process. So hopefully it will be out in a few weeks or so. Response rate 31%, kind of decent nowadays. It could be better, it could be worse. So the respondents could either reply on paper, by mail, or online. And 80% of them chose to send it in by traditional mail. So that's a tip for you who are doing surveys. It might be worth going for the traditional option. About the respondents, 70% males, 30% females. Males are a bit overrepresented since the population is about 63-37 in distribution. 64 years, also they are then a bit older because the average age in Sweden is 62 years for forest owners. Property size, 120 hectares in average. they have owned their forest quite long, 26 years. Half of them had an updated forest management plan, and also half were members of a forest owners association. And here you see what their main management objective was. They could rank 1 to 4 between these, and 42% had timber production as their main objective, 32% recreation, and so on. So if we first then look at their awareness, you can see here the distribution on scale 1 to 7 on how hard their forests have been hit by forest damage. But I think the most interesting figure is that 1 out of 5 forest owners don't know whether or not their forest has been affected. And I found some difference in awareness, and that female respondents were to a greater extent unaware of the current damage situation. Also, respondents with a low level of self-employment in forestry were to less extent aware of the damage situation. And finally, those who prioritized timber production were more aware of the situation compared to respondents with other main objectives. Then knowledge about forest damage. On top you see that a large proportion of the respondents thinks it's important that forest owners have knowledge about different types of damage. But in the below that, then you see that the proportion that thinks that they have great knowledge about either how to prevent forest damage and then how to take care of damage, then the proportions are that quite many think that they don't have that much knowledge in this. And here there was a clear difference between male and female respondents. But it's important to take into account that this is self-evaluation of how much do I know. So it could also, to some extent, reflect the confidence of the respondents, because that has been seen in other studies, that female forest owners don't have the same confidence in their role as a forest owner. So it could be worth doing more studies and studying the actual knowledge. Here also you can see that the knowledge to identify damage by themselves correlates with the degree of self-employment, how often you visit the forest, and also the activity. But the size of the forest property was not that important in this case, also, although there are some significant correlations also there. 15% said that they had taken part in some kind of training or education about forest damage, and it was most frequently organized by the Forest Owners Association. Also, other organizations were mentioned, like the Swedish Forest Agency and forest companies and so on. And it was then to a higher extent those who had a high degree of self-employment in forestry, who had an updated management plan, and had more recently done a forest management activity, that also had taken part in education. And the final research question was then that what kind of attitudes do they have towards different management alternatives? And these are alternatives that, for example, has been recommended by the Swedish Forest Agency. So I have not come up with these alternatives myself, since I'm not a forester. But so I investigated this, and on top you see whether or not they want to decrease the moose population. And here, female owners were more negative than male owners to that alternative. Also, owners prioritizing timber production were more in favor of reducing the moose population, and the elder owners were more positive than young owners. Second, I asked if they want to apply forestry without clear cutting in suitable areas. And here again, female owners were more positive to this than males. And there was also a positive correlation between the time elapsed since their last management activity and their willingness to implement this alternative. And forest owners with timber production as their main objective were the least positive to this alternative. Third option, to retain birch as retention trees when doing final felling, in order to get an abundance of birch then in the regeneration. And here, Forest Owners Association members and those with a high level of self-employment in forestry were less likely than others to choose this option. The following one, to implement the rest period or do burning after a clear cut. Here, association members were least likely to choose this management practice, and those prioritizing recreation were more positive than others. And the final one, would they like to plant alternative tree species such as larch or Pinus contorta instead of spruce or ordinary pine? Here, quite many were against this option, and especially those who prioritized recreation were against this. If we look at some correlations between these, then we can see that there's quite a strong correlation between applying forestry without clear cutting and retaining birch as retention trees, and also that those who want to reduce the moose population are more interested in using or planting larch and the Pinus contorta. So we can assume that we have two types of owners here. Finally, the respondents could rank 3 hypothetical seedling types with different growth characteristics and the resistance to pests. And here the majority ranked a medium alternative as the best option, while 34% chose a seedling with strong resistance to pests, but somewhat poorer growth characteristics. And finally, 11% chose the seedling with good growth but poor resistance. And here we could see a relationship then between the respondents' choice and the management objective, where those focusing on timber production then were more likely than others to choose this seedling with good growth but poor resistance. So some take-home messages from this study is that I think that many forests are unaware of the damage situation is worth considering in the future, because that means that the risk of damage, that damage is not taken care of, and then the risk that the damage spread in the area is then high. So check with your neighbor if they have went to their forest and seen the situation. We can also draw the conclusion that it's the traditional self-employed male owner with timber production as the main priority, and who therefore visits his forest often, has the highest awareness and feels more knowledgeable about forest damage than less active and distant owners. So in general, forest owners' ability to identify damage by themselves is low, except for moose grazing, which is the most common damage up here. And relatively few forest owners have training on forest damage. So are there ways to improve this number in a good way? Finally, we could see that the forest owners' interest in some of the management alternatives that are suggested may not be that interesting to them. And finally, that half of the forest owners lack an updated management plan is something to consider about, because other studies have shown that the presence of a forest management plan is good in order to prevent and take care of damage. So here also more actions are needed to get more forest owners to get a management plan. And finally, I want to thank the funders of this study, the SLU Forest Damage Center. And thank you.
Okay, thank you, Thomas.